My name is Wendy Stephenson. I'm co-chair of the Environmental Action Team. This is part of our quarterly speaker series, so I'm really glad to see so many of you here. Thank you for coming. Today's presentation is about the port. We're going to be learning about history and policies of the port. We'll go briefly over the candidates. There will be no political endorsements. Some of what is being said may be controversial, so we'll have some discussion afterwards, and that's all good and healthy. So our two speakers are from Olympia Indivisible, Carla Wulfsberg and John Ceazan. And I neglected to get bios, so they are going to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, and I recognize so many of you in the audience. That's great. So as Wendy just pointed out, I'm Carla Wulfsberg, and this is John Ceazan, and we're members of a team. We're called the Port of Olympia Action Team, and it's a team of Olympia Indivisible, and for the past several years, we've been following port activities and decisions made by the commissioners. And we hope that the information in this presentation will inform you and help to assist you as you vote for port candidates in November. And perhaps you, like us, I mean, some of you are more well-known. I can see one port commissioner here in the audience, and Deb Patton, have been following the port for some time. But I know it's not usually on most people's radar or sonar, so to speak, because we really don't go to the port for any particular permit or to pay a bill or anything. So I think that's why we've really decided we wanted to learn more about the port, and I hope this will be informative to you. Oh, it's not going. Let's see. There. So, yeah, so we're going to go back in time a little bit in our state's history before there were public ports, and acquaint you with how public ports came to exist. And then we're going to offer this history about the beginning and evolution of our port here in Olympia, which is a Thurston County-wide government agency. And we're also going to present a number of issues of public concern, some of which were resonating with citizens over 100 years ago in Washington State. And some of those issues continue to concern citizens today about the Port of Olympia. And then in conclusion, we'll present the 6 candidates running for Port Commissioner and their priorities if elected. And at the conclusion of our presentation, we will open it up for questions and comments. So we look forward to that. So let's get started. All right. So long before European settlers arrived, the Coast Salish people paddled and sailed the waters of Budd Inlet and Puget Sound for their transportation and for trading. They fished and gathered shellfish in these local waters. These were the ancestors of the Squaxin Island and Nisqually tribes today. Budd Inlet was a transfer point for these Native Americans as they made their way from Puget Sound to southern destinations and the Columbia River. And as Europeans arrived, they too depended on water as the most convenient method for transportation of people and goods. And early settlers often settled near deep water ports and navigable waterways. The cities of Olympia and Tumwater were no exception. So here's an artist's rendition of the Olympia waterfront and the Deschutes estuary in 1879. And the arrow on the right points to what was then a very small peninsula in Olympia reaching north. And if you look to the upper left, you can follow the Deschutes estuary into Tumwater, where you would also run into Tumwater Falls. In 1889, the new state constitution declared that these beds of navigable waters belonged to the people and gave the legislature power to designate which of those beds would become harbors. The history of public ports in Washington is closely associated with private railroad companies, private sawmills, timber yards, and other industries that grew to dominate ports. Railroads controlled not only the ports, but also controlled the shipping rates and wharf availability, promoting their own interests over local economic development. And the photograph you're looking at is of the Tacoma waterfront, and it's from the late 1890s, and it shows a wheat elevator built by the Puget Sound flouring mill, and it's an example of how railroads and private industries grew to cut off physical access to the waterfront. Ships from around the globe would load flour from this North Tacoma dock, and since most cities were dependent on trade, the move to create public ports was a contentious struggle with the railroads. Cities owed much of their growth to the railroads. They gave away huge tracts of land in the hope the Northern Pacific would choose their town for its western terminal. But the prize went to Tacoma. This photo shows Tacoma's Union Station, which opened in 1911. And in that same year, privately owned ports would be forever changed in Washington. Reformers argued for public control of ports to ensure standardized rates and equal access to port facilities. And with the opening of the Panama Canal on the horizon in 1914, engineers and city planners also argued that only public ownership would allow for the type of development necessary for ports to claim their share of the coming trade. Citizens lobbied for public control and access to ports. Their lobbying paid off because legislators in the state government drafted a bill, the Port District Act, which, if adopted, would authorize public-run port districts in the state. Strong support for public ownership of ports came from the farmers in eastern Washington and longshore workers. The Port District Act passed by a vote of Washington state citizens in 1911. Seattle was the first port created under this act and became the first autonomous municipal corporation in the nation to develop port terminal operations and commerce development. The Port District Act gave power to independent government bodies run by districts' elected commissioners to operate ports. A port district could be an entire county or a portion of one. With voter approval, port districts could levy taxes, issue bonds, acquire property by eminent domain, and lease port-owned property to private operators. But not all public ports are on the water. Ports also operate airports, railroads, business parks, and industrial sites. The basics set out in the Port District Act of 1911, now in the Revised Code of Washington, continues to guide ports in Washington state, though the original act has been amended to expand the authority of ports. Perhaps one flaw of this act was that no government agency was tasked with overseeing or monitoring the action of public ports. Since state law requires that public ports appoint an auditor, that's the only exception of any kind of oversight. The real oversight falls on the shoulders of private citizens. Ports are now an accepted part of state government and economic life, but when they were first formed, they were radical and controversial. So in the early 1900s, economic growth was booming in Thurston County and the city of Olympia was expanding. Olympia's waterfront industries were prospering, but due to the limited land access to water, businesses developed on top of pilings. A major obstacle to growth was the shallow mud flats that surrounded the peninsula. Of course, at high tide, it wasn't a problem for ships, but at low tide, even small boats would get beached in the mud. So by the 1980s, it was obvious that if Olympia was going to compete with Tacoma and Seattle for commerce, and if it was going to accommodate the demand for lumber, especially after the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, a major dredging and filling operation would be required. So Olympia's mayor, Doc Carla, rose to the occasion, raised private funds from Olympia residents to dredge the harbor. This created a deeper marine navigation channel for ships, and the dredged fill created 29 blocks of land on the peninsula and the eastern part of downtown. This new land opened development of commercial districts and for industries and railroads. And the pilings you see on the left shoreline there would soon be replaced by what's known as the Carlian Fill. Just turn my page here. World War I marked a huge boost in demand for lumber and brought Olympia into the shipbuilding industry. A dozen ships were built for the war, but when the war ended, it all came to a close. and this was the turning point that transitioned Olympia's privately owned port to a publicly owned port. In 1922, the Olympia Chamber of Commerce supported the formation of a public port that could open up new economic opportunities, and the measure was approved by a vote of Thurston County residents in the same year. However, when the public voted to create a port district, they did not support a levy to fund it, so it was clear from the beginning that the port would mostly be expected to borrow and pay its own way. The three new port commissioners in 1922 envisioned a prosperous future. The harbor in Olympia, dominated by the lumber trade, included 30 lumber mills, 5 shingle mills, and a veneer factory and a cannery on the waterfront. And in the photo on the right, you can see logs in East Bay waiting to be milled. From 1928 to 30, the port shipped more than 280 million board feet of lumber. These were record levels. And in 1929, about 224 vessels called at the Port of Olympia. But let's skip ahead to 2022. And the port had its best year in a decade, with only 35 ships calling at Olympia's port, of which 24 were the Weyerhaeuser log ship, its only tenant. And as of July this year, 2023, only 10 ships had called at the port. So back to the 1940s and 50s, when high volumes of ship lumber continued, they were continuing through World War II with the addition of canned fruit and vegetables. Wartime demand exposed a growing problem, however, the overcutting of timber. Local mills began to close in the 1950s. And in addition, the Olympia Canning Company, a 40-year-old business at the port, also closed. Significant changes to the Deschutes estuary came in the 1950s, and those changes that occurred more than 70 years ago have significant ramifications at the port today, which you will hear about a little bit later. For thousands of years, the Deschutes River flowed through a tidal estuary in Budd Inlet, and this photo with its northern view shows the estuary in the channel of the Deschutes River as it winds its way through the mudflats and under the 4th Avenue Bridge, and this was before there was a dam. The red arrow points to the Deschutes River as it's flowing under the 4th Avenue Bridge. So local efforts had long advocated making the mudflats more appealing by damming up the river. Early architects of the Capitol campus, however, advocated for a tidal reflecting pool, but no dam or lake was ever mentioned in their plans. But forces were underway to create a lake. So in 1937, the legislature took its first action toward the creation of what would become Capitol Lake. It purchased privately owned land in the Deschutes waterway, and the circled area that you see at the top of the photo indicates the location of the lake today after the dam was constructed, with the Deschutes estuary below. Action to construct the lake was suspended at the onset of World War II, but after the war, the project moved forward and was completed in 1951. 7 years later, another major change was coming to the Olympia region. In 1958, construction was completed on the interstate highway through Tumwater and Olympia. And the red arrow at the bottom shows the freeway heading east, crossing the Deschutes River. The estuary was altered yet once again. The river flowing north was at one time 1,200 feet across, but has been narrowed to about 150 feet across to provide footings for the freeway. And I think you can see the footings in the lower part of the freeway bridge there. So the freeway would impact the port because trucks would be moving goods north and south. Over its first 40 years, the port evolved from literally just being a port to becoming an industrial base. And the photo illustrates how the Port Peninsula was dominated by industries employing hundreds of workers, not to mention workers at the mills and related businesses on the shores of Budd Inlet. And the red arrow that you see there now points to the location of the Olympia Farmers Market today. As Olympia's industrial phase wound down, the port looked south to purchase the Olympia Airport. Aircraft had operated as early as 1911 from a site in Tumwater known as the Bush Prairie Airfield Site. The flight of Lindbergh across the Atlantic in 1927 inspired the Olympia Chamber of Commerce to purchase the prairie land. And then the following year, the city of Olympia passed a bond issue to acquire the property. But it wasn't until 35 years later, in 1963, when a new port manager and a new comprehensive plan was in place, that the Port of Olympia expanded into air transportation with the purchase of the Olympia Airport from the city of Olympia. The port also took over land grants from the federal government that came with the airport, including what is now called the New Market Industrial Campus and the Tumwater Town Center, and this also includes what's known as the Clearwater Center. This property makes the port an important landholder in Tumwater in addition to the airport itself. The milled lumber shipments and related sawmill jobs ended in 1967. 3 plywood plants on the Port Peninsula had closed. Cheaper labor took the mills to southern states. However, the demand for unprocessed log exports was on the rise. The old industries, the mills, and the creosote factory on the Port Peninsula were gone, but they left behind a legacy of pollution, including persistent and dangerous toxins like dioxin, petroleum hydrocarbons, and even arsenic. Dioxin, by the way, is one of the most dangerous carcinogenic chemicals known, and it's in Butt Inlet today. With the shipping of logs, bark creates pollution when it enters the water via runoff from the Port Peninsula. So starting in the 1970s, the state legislature made cleanup a part of the mission of all public ports. And that was a huge change, and it's still evolving. And John's going to tell you a little bit about the Butt Inlet cleanup issues later. By the late 1960s, the industries on the port had closed, leaving only log shipments. So in the early 1970s, the port commissioners focused on the marine terminal and the navigation channel for the log shipments. The channel was dredged to accommodate deep draft log ships, and this dredged fill added 54 acres of property, nearly a square mile, to the east side of the peninsula. So the red line there shows an indication of the area that was filled. The port moved in a new direction when it decided to transition some of this new waterfront property to include recreation on the Port Peninsula. An entirely new look was coming to the port. So this is a southern aerial view that shows the Port Peninsula's transformation from the photo on the left in 1969 to the photo on the right, which is a contemporary photo today. The red arrow on the right points to what was called the East Bay Marina Project, which we know today as Swantown Marina. This was the first non-industrial port facility for Thurston County residents, and Swantown offers waterfront parks and a promenade trail. About 10 years after the completion of the Swantown Marina, the port constructed a public area known as the Port Plaza. This was to attract businesses to port property. The Port Plaza is located on the west side of the Port Peninsula, south of the marine terminal, near the farmers market. You've probably all been there at least once. The port has over time acquired a significant amount of property to become the largest property owner in Thurston County. This is an aerial view, and it's looking south, and the red arrows you see at the bottom around the Port Peninsula on the right and left include the marine terminal, the Port Plaza, Swantown Marina, and a little bit further south along the promenade where there's a walking trail. The arrow in the upper right, however, is pointing to the property in Tumwater, the New Market Industrial Campus and the Tumwater Town Center. And then just to the left of that arrow is the arrow that points to the Olympia Regional Airport. And if you look to the far left, you'll see another red arrow, and that's pointing in the direction of what's known as the Commerce Business Center in Lacey. So in 2017, the port purchased the Commerce Business Center, 3 industrial flex space buildings located in the Meridian campus area of Lacey. And this is the port's first property investment in Lacey. While managing inherited real estate near the airport and waterfront has long been a part of the port's mission, this Lacey real estate speculation is a new venture for the port. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later from John. Now I'd like to turn it over to John, and he's going to offer you some background about issues of public concern. John?
Well, thank you, Carla, and thank you for letting us be here today, and it's really a pleasure. So I'd like to talk about a few of the concerns about the Port of Olympia that members of the public have identified over recent years. Commissioners approved the purchase of the Lacey CVC buildings with the expectation that there would be an annual income of about $500,000 from the buildings. At the time, the commissioners were not informed of an analysis showing that the buildings required $1 million in repairs, including roofing, heating, and air conditioning. A market analysis completed 2 years after the purchase showed that the buildings are home to a number of tenants, but there are empty spaces for lease. Costs, repair, maintenance, and debt far outweigh CVC rental income. Last year, in 2022, the Port Commissioners appropriated nearly $450,000 to re-roof just one of the 3 buildings. 2 more re-roofing projects will be necessary at some point. These expenses raise questions about how the public benefits from the port as a real estate owner. Real estate speculation is a port venture that deserves much deeper scrutiny. Log shipping by Weyerhaeuser accounts for about 80% of all activity at the marine terminal. Weyerhaeuser occupies some of the most valuable real estate on the Port Peninsula, leasing 24.5 acres, almost the entire north end of the peninsula. However, the marine terminal continues to be the largest money loser of all the port business units, in addition to being a source of pollution on Budd Inlet. The taxpayers of Thurston County have been subsidizing the log shipping operations at the port terminal for many years, to the tune of $1 to $2 million on average per year. Why is the port losing so much money at the marine terminal? As you heard from Carla earlier in the presentation, shipping traffic at the port has declined significantly over the past several decades, from a high in the neighborhood of 200 vessels per year to our current situation in which we have maybe 20 to 30 ships per year. There are several other factors contributing to the loss at the marine terminal, which I'll discuss in a minute. To illustrate the port's loss, let's take a quick look at the proposed port budget for 2023. Overall, the port expects to lose $7.2 million on all combined operations. As you heard earlier, at least $1 to $2 million of that loss will be at the marine terminal. So the port depends on property tax dollars to cover their losses and make ends meet. How much do we contribute to help the port make ends meet? Right around $7.5 million. I think we need to ask ourselves what public benefits are coming back to the citizens of Thurston for their tax dollars at the port. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of factors that contribute to the port's loss at the marine terminal. One primary reason that our port is not competitive with other ports further north is our location at the southernmost end of Puget Sound. The map demonstrates that the ports of Tacoma, Seattle, and Everett are much more accessible than the Port of Olympia. In addition, large container ships, which are the most profitable for shipping companies, are too massive to navigate past the Port of Tacoma. They can't get through the Tacoma Narrows. The Port of Tacoma is an example of what a modern deepwater port looks like today. This port can handle large container ships, which are the standard for profitable shipping in today's global market. No wonder the small Port of Olympia, with its location on Puget Sound, is not competitive in the current environment of international shipping. Looking into the future, when the Deschutes Estuary Restoration Project removes the Fifth Avenue Dam, silt from the Deschutes River will flow into Budd Inlet and impact the port, the Olympia Yacht Club, and Swantown Marina. The red arrow points north to the Fifth Avenue Dam. The port is currently making efforts to ensure payment for future dredging through 2050 from its partners in the Deschutes Estuary Project. Therefore, it is improbable that a deepwater terminal is sustainable without significant local taxpayer, state, and federal grant subsidies once the Fifth Avenue Dam is removed. It is reasonable for us to assume that this will put an unbearable burden on taxpayers now and in the future. Estimates for continued dredging will cost millions of dollars. This is a satellite view of the Port Peninsula. On the right is East Bay and on the left is West Bay. At the bottom of the slide is downtown Olympia. We obtained this image from the Department of Ecology. The purple areas are hotspots, the most polluted areas surrounding the Port Peninsula. The port is in the initial stages of developing a state-mandated cleanup of legacy pollution in Butt Inlet, and that has a price tag of at least $190 million. Currently, engineers propose to deposit the contaminated dredged material with cement on top of the Port Peninsula, thereby saving the cost of transporting contaminated material. The plan will raise the height of the peninsula to protect against sea level rise. And as logical as this seems, there are some serious questions about this plan. The port's proposed cleanup plan ignores current pollution sources in the inlet. Surface dioxin contamination in Butt Inlet indicates it is likely legacy pollution from the former creosote plant, Cascade Pole. Dioxin is one of the most biologically damaging chemicals known. These current sources of pollution need to be addressed or the bay will be recontaminated after the cleanup is completed. The port is ignoring basic science in the proposed plan of cleanup and have not brought scientists to the table to advise them. The plan will cost taxpayers millions of dollars and it will not restore the inlet and marine habitat as promised by the port. Rather than a cleanup and restoration project for Butt Inlet, the port's underlying goal is to use state and federal funding to maintain the navigation channel for the marine terminal and the Olympia Yacht Club and Swantown Marina. This will only serve corporate and private interests and will continue business as usual at the marine port, the marine terminal. Here's an aerial view of the Port Peninsula. Vision 2050 represents the port's most comprehensive public engagement initiative to date. Adopted by the Port Commission in 2019, it presents a new opportunity for the port's focus to align with community priorities. Destination Waterfront is one initiative of Vision 2050 that focuses on developing the east end and north end, east side and north end of the peninsula. The red arrows point to the areas included in Destination Waterfront. In Vision 2050, the top ranking preferences for the Port Peninsula were for open spaces, recreation, access to the water, a community hub, and a tourist destination. People said they wanted to be able to walk and fish, swim, and kayak. In a subsequent survey, a living shoreline was the top priority. It's the responsibility of the Port Commissioners to keep a close watch on the development of this project. As the port plans Destination Waterfront, Commissioners should protect the preferences of stakeholders as clearly stated in the Vision 2050 report. The port property includes the New Market Industrial Campus in Tumwater, located south of Tumwater Boulevard and west of the Olympia Regional Airport. Over 700 acres were given to the port through federal land grants that came with the airport. Development proposals for the port's Tumwater property have caused much concern in recent years. The Panettone project, a mega warehouse to be constructed on leased port property in this area, has been opposed strongly by our local progressive environmental community. Concerns over loss of tree canopy, building in a flood area, loss of habitat for endangered species, increased truck traffic, higher air pollution, and negative health impacts, particularly in the nearby residential neighborhood and a middle school, did not stop the Port of Olympia from approving the Panettone warehouse developments. The photos on the right are what we expect to see in this area. Swire is another development project on 95 acres of leased property approved by the commissioners at the airport that was strongly opposed by our local progressive environmental community. While Swire Coca-Cola, a Chinese-owned company, made the presentation that sold port commissioners on the project, the company that is listed on the lease is Swire Land, and there is no mention of a Coca-Cola plant. However, the city of Tumwater has recklessly promised water use rights to Swire Land. Perhaps the most egregious issue in the Swire lease is the loss of vulnerable habitat for one federally protected and two state-protected endangered species. Also, the troubling fact that the lease option extends for a period of 75 years until 2097. And the public has no idea what Swire's real intentions are. Noise pollution, leaded aviation fuel, potential expansion of expanded cargo flights from burgeoning warehouse development are all major concerns about the airport. The airport has taken significant acreage in many homes from nearby neighborhoods by eminent domain, despite master plans promising no such expansions. There's been a significant lack of transparency and inclusion of the public in the port's decision-making process. Unlike the county that holds public hearings on important issues, public hearings with the port commissioners are rarely, if ever, held. This attitude goes against Section 30 of the Revised Code of Washington for Officers and Agencies that says, and I quote, "The people insist on remaining informed so that they may maintain control over the instruments that they have created. The people, in delegating authority, do not give the public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know," end quote. It's important that we select commissioners who will provide adequate information to the public, include the public in its decision-making process, and protect the environment. And Carla, I'd like to turn it back to you now.
Thanks, John. So, what to consider when voting for a port candidate? Well, electing 3 new port commissioners in November offers us an opportunity to help the port turn the tide from a long run of poor business decisions, serving corporate and private interests, and ignoring the public, to a port that serves all the citizens in Thurston County and is a good environmental steward for the public property and addresses climate change. 3 basic questions we might want to ask port candidates include: how will you protect the environment? How will you as commissioners spend our taxpayer dollars? And how will you support all Thurston County residents? Good port commissioners will make science-based decisions that address climate change and the cleanup and restoration of Butt Inlet. They will use the $7.5 million public tax dollars to benefit all residents of Thurston County, such as supporting countywide broadband, as an example, which is affordable high-speed internet. They will study and follow meaningful public planning documents and activities such as Vision 2050, the Newmarket Industrial Campus Master Plan, which they have yet to approve, and the Deschutes Estuary Restoration Project. Good port commissioners will help the port to be a good land-owning neighbor in Thurston County instead of speculating primarily for port benefits. They will encourage public input and support transparency in how the port governs. They will encourage meaningful public input into revising the airport master plan and defend local community interest in regional airport planning. Good port commissioners will transition the port to non-polluting operations such as solar, wind, and help expand broadband, and will provide well-paid family wage jobs and operations that contribute to the county's infrastructure. They will support local agriculture, local farmers, They will strive to make the waterfront and Butt Inlet a clean and inviting place for all of us to enjoy. Port commissioners have an important role in protecting our natural resources. In addition to restoring marine habitat in Butt Inlet, the port has a responsibility of environmental stewardship to protect tree canopy, watersheds, and critical habitat for vulnerable species on all port properties. So now you're looking at a map of the 5 Thurston County districts, which correspond to the new 5 port districts. These districts were increased from 3 to 5 through a county-wide vote last year. And the map shows 2 new districts, District 4, the light blue one, the large one in the south, and District 5, the dark blue one in the northeast. And the arrows point to 3 districts, 1, District 4, and 5, with port candidates running in the upcoming general election. 2 candidates are running in each of those 3 districts, and you'll be voting for 1 candidate in each district, so a total of 3 new port commissioners. And now John's going to give an introduction to the port candidates. John?
Okay, so obviously we have 6 candidates running for Port Commission in the 3 districts. So the source of my information that I'm presenting to you on these candidates is from the candidate websites, with the exception of Troy Kirby, who doesn't have a website. But the information on Troy was from the Indivisible questionnaire response. So let's take a look at the District 1 candidates. Okay, District 1 is 2 candidates are Jasmine Vasabada and Bill McGregor. Bill had a long career in port facilities management, working for 3 different Northwest ports. He is a former port commissioner who served 4 terms from 2006 to 2021. As commissioner at the Port of Olympia, Bill helped to develop the Small Cities program, in which the port provides annual grants to support projects in the South Thurston County cities of Yelm, Rainier, Tenino, and Bucota. He voted in favor of the Panettone Warehouse project in Tumwater. He also voted in favor of the purchase of the Lacey Commerce Business Center. And he's a strong advocate for continuing operations at the marine terminal and for the Weyerhaeuser log shipping contract. Okay, Jasmine is a graduate of Harvard, and she holds a law degree from UW. Her qualifications include being a public interest lawyer, a legislative counsel, and an energy policy specialist. She was formerly employed as the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Washington Department of Commerce. She served as counsel to the Washington House of Representatives Office of Program Research from 2013 to 2016. Jasmine's priorities include bolstering economic development, protecting the environment, maintaining a diverse, inclusive environment, and bringing opportunity to all of Thurston County. The 2 District 4 candidates are Rose Gunderson and Maggie Sanders. Rose is the Vice President of Operations and Retail Services for the Washington Retail Association, and prior to that, she was the Small Business Liaison at Labor and Industries for 3.5 years. She has been an activist in community organizing for the prevention of human trafficking and co-founded a nonprofit called Washington Engage, which is now known as Washington Trafficking Prevention. As she states on her website, Rose plans to work with the Port Commission to ensure training on human trafficking for port staff to identify potential vulnerabilities. Rose says she will prioritize inclusion through engagement, promoting living wage jobs, and creating a destination waterfront. Maggie is a Native American and member of the Makah tribe and resides in Tenino. She has both a master's and a bachelor's and a master's from Evergreen State College. Among her qualifications, she is certified by FEMA in natural disaster preparedness, an equal opportunity mediator, and a NASA ambassador of at the Marine Services Division. Maggie says that her top priorities will be environmental stewardship, fiscal responsibility, transparency in government, and democratic accountability. In addition, she proposes to use port resources to assist farmers in Thurston County and to enhance support for the Southwest Washington Food Hub, a farmer-owned cooperative. In District 5, we've got Troy Kirby and Sarah Tong. Troy has a master's degree in business from Seattle U and a bachelor's from EWU. He worked in the sports industry for 15 years and is currently a small business owner. He has served on the Lacey Parks Commission from 2018 to 2022 and in the Olympia Film Society Board from 2016 to 2017. He is also an instructor at the St. Martin's School of Business. Among Troy's priorities is to acquire more real estate for the port with a focus on South County in order to prepare for inevitable population growth and to provide long-term leasing revenue to the port. Sarah has 11 years of experience in various roles of information technology and holds a bachelor's degree in IT from Western Governors University. She is currently employed as a technical supervisor managing an IT team and will bring these skills to her role as port commissioner. Her highest priority is environmental protection and addressing climate change. She says, quote, "Future generations need a healthy planet first and foremost," unquote. She also says that she will promote the responsible use of natural resources and land under port management. Sarah states that she would utilize technology and has the expertise to discover innovative solutions to enhance the port's efficiency. She has a strong interest for the port to bring broadband throughout Thurston County that would provide benefits to all residents of Thurston County. 2 of the 3 current port commissioners will continue their four-year tenure through 2025. They're Bob Ayal in District 2 and Amy Evans Harding in District 3, who we have the pleasure of being with us today. We hope the information presented here has helped to inform you about the critical issues at the port and will assist you in making an informed choice for port candidates when you receive your ballot to vote in the upcoming election. You and the other voters of Thurston County will determine who fills the commissioner's seats in Districts 1, 4, and 5. Remember, you got to return your ballots by November 7th. So thank you for your attention, and I would like to just let Carla have the last word.
Well, actually, you're going to get the last word. So we just want to encourage you, if anyone wants to write us, our email address is up there, portforthepeople@gmail.com. And now we'd like to open it up for questions and comments from all of you. So, do we have anyone who'd like to ask a question? Yes?
Yeah, so I understand the port loses
Wait,
money.
sorry, 1 minute. Wait,
Right. Sorry about that, Teresa. Can you turn that one off?
No, I just want to remind everybody that no matter how well you can project your voice in person, the people online won't be able to hear you unless you wait for a mic to be in your hand. So please be patient.
Thank you. Okay, I know the port loses money like mad. How does that compare with other ports around the country? Because I understand, like, not all of them make money, and maybe that's
I
not even
think
such a great thing.
my understanding is that most ports pretty much pay for themselves without taxpayer subsidies.
Okay.
Okay, you just said around the country. What about how our Port Commission operates in comparison to the other ones inside the state of Washington? Not just financially, but do they all operate under these same kinds of premises? And is environmental stewardship acknowledged at any level?
Well, I think state law, of course, requires them to do this cleanup, and the state law actually has, all it lays out what ports are able to do. And I think we mentioned what they're able to do. It's my understanding there are some ports in Washington State who don't tax the public. They are self-sufficient. Others, of course, do. And I think maybe the bottom line is what are the benefits we get from the taxation? It's reasonable that ports, they're allowed to tax, and I think it's reasonable that they do, if in fact they are providing economic benefits to all of us in the county. So we don't have an analysis of every single port in Washington State, but you can go on the Washington, it's called Washington Public Ports Association website to get more information, or contact them for all the details about other ports.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I guess if the ports can acquire land, it seems reasonable they should be able to liquidate it. Are there any limitations to the ports selling off some of these land assets that they have that are not currently making money, so that they can get out from one, the burden, and two, get the funds that would come therefrom, the sales?
Yeah, I believe they can sell land. The only land that is really under federal restriction is the airport, because the Federal Aviation Administration has jurisdiction over that. And that's recently come up in a port situation where there is a building that's that's near the airport, that is a hotel. And the port they were asked to the public and a local community, well, let's see, what's it called? Thurston Thurston Housing, I think is the name of the group, I can't remember exactly, but they wanted to buy the hotel and create low-income housing, and the hotel was for sale, but their restrictions with the FAA and the port wasn't able to follow through to really get the building released, and so it's now been sold, and that's no longer on the table. So I think that's pretty much it, don't you think, John? I think they can sell property.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an option that should be looked at. I think that, especially because there's this, fairly substantial bond debt, right, Amy? And you could sell some of the commercial property to reduce that debt. I mean, that's an option.
In fact, they did just sell a piece of property to Lot, and it was on the Port Peninsula. Remember that? They just sold that, yeah, they sold one to Lot. So, yeah, they can sell property. Sure.
I can see that there could be other benefits to the community besides economic, like recreational benefit or transportation or housing. I'm kind of wondering if we would get federal or state transportation dollars if we put a ferry terminal, a passenger ferry terminal at the Port of Olympia.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting, proposition. And I think that, this is why this election is so important, because we need, I'm not close enough, sorry. I think what we really would like to see is, some commissioners that have a vision for the future and could consider all the options that we could move. There's many directions that we can move with the port in the future. And that's just one, of many, proposals, options that should be considered.
There was something recently about the sports complex near New Market.
Up to your mouth.
The sports complex near New Market, Little League has had a very good deal on using the land, but now the Aviation Authority is saying you got to make money on it. Any comments on that?
Well, I don't think we're really prepared to talk about that, but that's pretty contentious. And it's difficult for the Little League, who've been on that property for a long time. So my question is, why all this happened so suddenly, and why they have to vacate eventually when they don't really have a real revenue source. I mean, it's a Little League operation. So anyway, but maybe you can write the port commissioners and ask them about that. That's a good thing for all of us to do.
You mentioned that the port meetings weren't open. It seems to me they have like regular meetings, so I'm unclear what,
Yeah.
and it seems that
yeah.
it's open to the public.
Oh, yes,
So
they have the,
So I don't know what you mean by a more,
Okay, good question. So the port does have regular port commission meetings twice a month, and they have a work session. They are open to the public. They're also available on Zoom. However, what the port doesn't have, what they don't offer to the public, are sort of like town halls on specific issues to really hear a lot of public input. You have 3 minutes to give a public comment at a port commission meeting. So if you really want to get in depth on an issue, it would be like the county, where they have these public forums where the commissioners are all there. I've been to one public forum, but the commissioners weren't there. It was the director of the airport, Mr. Warren Hendrickson. And there were a lot of people who were really concerned about the expansion of our Olympia airport. And so there was one public, it was sort of a forum, we met at their offices downtown. But that's the only one to my knowledge, and I've been following it for several years. So getting public feedback, there are a lot of experts in the community, and I think the Port Commission commissioners would benefit from hearing from the public about specific issues that are of real concern. But there really isn't an opportunity to do that in a public forum. Does that answer your question?
It seems that it seems though from the RCW or whatever you showed it, they do comply with that, don't they?
Well, they have public meetings, but as I said, the
Yeah.
public meetings, an individual can give a comment
Yeah.
at the beginning, 3 minutes, and then there's certain times during the meeting that often you're allowed to give a public comment on an action item. But to really get in depth and
No.
have a conversation with them,
Uh-huh.
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, as opposed to the RCW though, which just says you need a public meeting, or does the RCW go back further into saying that they need to have this?
I
this
think
type
they
of-
probably just are doing what the RCW says.
All right.
However, you know, for better public transparency and to really engage with the public, to allow the public to give good input to the board commissioners,
Yeah,
a
I-
public forum would be really,
yeah,
I
I
think,
see
a
your
great
point.
idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Moving in on that same question, does the state of Washington have public meeting laws when, as far as these 3, soon to be 5 commissioners meet, if 2 of them meet outside of their meeting time, is that legal?
Yeah, that was one of the key reasons to expand the commission, because it allows the commissioners to meet, you know, as a pair without, you know, in private, whereas before they couldn't. And that, I think, you know, that was one of the real problems with, that was brought up.
Okay, so with the new composition being 5, as long as they have less than 3, 2 of them can meet and talk about what they're thinking about. And that would be legal.
That's my understanding.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm wondering what the, how much time the commissioners spend on their work, and if they're compensated, and who pays them.
You wanna take that?
Yeah, well, right now, we know they're not full-time, and we understand right now they get $600, about $600 or $700 a month, and then they get per diem for their meetings. They've just voted to increase that to $1,000 a month, but that won't take effect for the current port commissioners. It will only be for the incoming new port commissioners. So, yeah, it's not a full-time job. It's a part-time job.
And who pays them? Where does the money come from?
Well, on the port budget.
Yeah, it's from the port budget.
Okay, and you said they voted to
The
increase
port
it.
commissioners.
Voted to
The current
increase
3 port commissioners voted to increase.
their salary.
Well, no, they won't be able to receive it, I don't think, for about a year. I think that the new commissioners will receive it immediately when they're elected. That's my understanding.
Interesting, interesting.
I recently became aware that there is a large host of committees that serve the Port of Olympia. I believe there are members of some of those committees here present today, and I'd like to know what the role of the committees are and how do they interact with commissioners?
There's only one
Well, I think,
Yeah,
yeah, I think there's only the Port of Olympia
Citizens Advisory.
Citizens Advisory Committee, POCAC. And that, I think there's now, I don't know, because I think something like 11 members now.
I'll answer that if that's all right. Debbie.
Yeah, we have a member of the POCAC.
Debbie
with
Patton,
us.
I'm a
Right.
longtime member of this congregation, and I'm currently the president of the POCAC, Port of Olympia Citizens Advisory Committee. We have 16 members. We have still 1 vacancy. We're trying to find some person of color that lives in one of the unrepresented new districts. We have regular monthly meetings, and we have subcommittee meetings, and we take on projects at the bequest of the commission. And I would direct you all to the Port website, which is portolympia.com. Under the commission section, you will see the POCAC page, and it lists all the projects that they've worked on since 2017. There are additional projects that were before that time but are not on the website. Does that answer that question? Or did you have more question about that?
Could I just make a comment about
Yes.
that? And this is my understanding from a citizen's point of view, and that is, it is an advisory committee, and even like the public, the port doesn't have to accept their advice. The port commissioners don't have to accept their advice. It's an advisory committee. They don't have any authority to force the commissioners to make any certain kinds of decisions, and I don't think that would be inaccurate, would it?
No,
Okay.
no, we don't. We
Okay.
make, if you look at some of the past reports, one is on ferries, and State Senator Sam Hunt has worked with us on that. They've been trying for many years to get a ferry service here, but that involves the Department of Transportation and the capital budget and so on. But you can look and see these reports that we've made over the years, and some they've adopted, like an apprenticeship program for workers in the trades for these new projects for Destination Waterfront and Vision 2050, and others they haven't, like food trucks down on the North Point where that cap is, where the former Cascade Pool site. So some have been approved and adopted and others haven't. But you can look at all of them there. The port's budget is there as well, and there's a general meeting every December, public hearing to listen to and comment on the annual budget.
Could I just make one more comment about the Port Advisory Committee? And that is that, to my knowledge, there are only 2 members of that committee who are strong environmentalists. One is a retired marine biologist, and the other one is a strong environmentalist. They're both on that committee, and they're new. And that's not something that we've seen in years past. So we're glad to see that presence of environmental stewards on the POCAC, and we wish there were more of them, because we think it's important with regards to climate change and all that we're dealing with in our environment.
Or environmentalists, so I could, if you want to email me, Deb Patton, Pattin @gmail.com. I can give you the information on some of the other members and their science backgrounds and so on. I also have some inaccuracies I saw in this report, but instead of taking up all our time, if you'd want to email me, I can share those if anybody wants to see them or hear them.
I have a structural question about POCAP. And that is all right, we're relatively new residents in the state of Washington. And I was horrified when I figured out the structure of the board commissions, that they didn't have any accountability to anybody but themselves. That blew my mind. And I was sent back, I was told, go back to the Constitution, Judith, and you'll understand if you just go look at the Constitution. Well, I went and looked at the Constitution and I understood, and I was still horrified. So here is my question. Where did POCAC come from? Is this something that the Port Commission just said, well, let's do this, we need some public input? And how long have they been in existence? I mean, they're an advisory group. How did they get there? I mean, I know who you are, but what's your authority level, and how did you come about, and how do you play into this picture? Because I'd never heard of you.
You know, I think you might have a good conversation with Deb Patton and perhaps Commissioner Amy Evans Harding about this issue. We understand that they're appointed, and and I think they're appointed by, I think it's the president of the POCAC, and I think the chair of the commission. And it's gone down to, during COVID times, it was really just a couple of members, and they didn't meet very often, but I think they're trying to really increase that. So I don't know that's probably in the port's own,
That's my question.
yeah.
That's simply my question. It's just, is there authority that established it? Or did the Port Commission decide they wanted one, that they needed input from the public? And how long, obviously they've been in existence since before 2017, but I'd never heard of them before, so I was just curious as to where the authority for them came from.
Yeah, I think you can get a lot more information from the port's website or talking to Ms. Patton about it. We're not authorities on that. They're an advisory committee, that's what they are. And we are citizens who basically attend the meetings and try to make sense of what the port's decision-making process is, frankly. Any other questions, comments?
I'm just a little, the port is losing a lot of money and we're subsidizing it. Is there anything looking into how they can make better money? Is there any kind of auditing to account for this? Is it because they're just making sweetheart deals with corporations? And yeah, we definitely got to look at environmental and maybe reduce things, but they already have invested in things and built things. What's being done to help them make more money or be more accountable for that? I mean, it's still got to make money, right, in order to be self-sustaining. So how is that being monitored and audited? And
Well, they appoint an auditor, and as my understanding, it was a state auditor. I attended the auditor's review last year, I think it was last summer. So that's part of the statute, the requirements. They have to have an audit every year to audit their books. But they can raise taxes if they don't have enough revenue. They can raise taxes every year. I think it's what, 1%, 1.5%. So they have that authority. They have individuals, employees who work in their real estate development area. They have a lot of income. I mean, they lease property throughout the county. They lease a lot of buildings. Swantown Marina, all those boats there have, they have mortgage fees. So, and there's property that the port owns that has, they've designated as eventually going to have warehouses and so forth. And there's been revenue coming in from that with those lease options. So they have a lot of opportunities. I think you could kind of compare it in a way. I like to look at it as sort of, well, if the port loses money or if it doesn't make a lot of money, but we're all getting a great deal of benefit, that's fine. The thing is if you don't get the benefit for your tax dollars, there's a problem there. When you compare it, for example, with the Timberland Library system, we get a lot of benefit from that. We pay the taxes and we get a lot of benefit. And that's what I think we should be getting from the port. For what we are contributing, we should be getting really good benefits back to all of us in the county.
and what they are doing business-wise to make money, why aren't they making more? And another reason why I've understood most port authorities are supposed to be self-sufficient. And how are they allowed to dip into the taxpayers so much without any approval? This is outrageous because it sounds like we're subsidizing sweetheart deals for corporations.
I think that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, I don't quite know how to respond to that, to be honest with you. I think the port tries very hard to make good decisions and balance the books. And I think it's just that things haven't worked out real great. I mean, I think that was what was behind the Swire deal, is to balance the books, because it's pretty lucrative for the port and over the length of the contract. But I don't know how great it is for the county, but that's what they're doing. I think that, now we're in a different environment than we were a few years back, where we have climate change going on. There's a lot of environmental issues that just seem that should be, in my personal opinion, that should be the top priority, and the port has a big role in protecting the environment. I mean, these properties that they own and the terminal and all of that have a huge impact on the local environment. They have a big footprint. So that's where I would like to see. I'm not that concerned. I don't mind paying my, $70 a year or something that I have to pay on my property taxes to the port. If they were protecting the environment, I'd be happy about it. But that's just, and I'm just talking for myself personally,
Well, what about accountability from the businesses? I think we have a question online.
Not a question online, but just from me, that it's kind of, I mean, the USPS loses however many billions of dollars a year because it's a service, and the point of publicizing the port is that it is a service, and so it's I mean, if it was just going to be a business, you could have left it to the railroad, but it's supposed to be serving the taxpayers, and so maybe there needs to be more accountability for that, but I think it's reasonable to expect it to lose money, especially as a very uncompetitive port geographically.
Post office does support itself. It is an independent entity. Sorry about that. Wrong.
I think there's a question online that we're asked to take.
No, that was just part of it.
That was the question? Oh.
Notice the commissioners have had a huge turnover in directors and labor people at the port, and it seems quite often they have headhunters come in to bring these people in for interviews, and I'm just curious why you don't think it's working properly lately.
You're talking about selection of personnel. Well, we're going to get a big show about what, how to select this new executive director. I mean, basically, the commissioners only select one employee, and that's the executive director. And the executive director is supposed to hire everybody else. So it's really important that the executive director is really good. And so we're going to be witnessing this process. And I'm hopeful that the new commissioners will get a chance to weigh in when they come in. So it'll be 5 heads working together to come up with the best decision on who to hire.
All right. Let's just do one more question. Amy, did you have your hand up? No? Oh, all right. We could do one more question, but in the interest of time, we're going to have to, wrap things up. Okay, Sue, one more.
So since POCAC was brought up, I'm just wondering how many people are on the POCAC? How do they choose them? Is there an application process? And who determines who is allowed to be on the committee that Debbie Patton runs? Every time they take applications, they post the application on the port website, they advertise it on the port website, they put it on their Facebook and their Instagram page, they put press releases in the Olympian. Probably now we'll put it in Jolt now that that's a thing. Sometimes it's on the radio. They send out emails to the list of the people that typically attend port meetings because you sign in when you're there as a guest. They send that out. The application is then completed and talks about your interests and your volunteer experience and so on. Those get sent in. The chair of the POCAC and the, one of the commissioners and the executive director, whoever that is, reads them. Then they conduct interviews, and then that person, the chair of the POCAC, the vice president of the commission, and the executive director make a recommendation, and then that list of recommendations goes to the commissioners, and then they vote up or down on each person. And the terms are just 2 years, and you can run again, so you can run a total of serve 4 times. The chairperson rotates. This is my first year as the chair, but I've been on for 5 years. We rotate the chair, and then they try to get geographic representation of the 3 districts that we have now. Like, as I mentioned, we're trying to get the 4 districts, and we try to get a mix of people with different interests, labor and environmental, and you know, people in the boating community, you know, all the different, and now we have somebody that's a pilot, used to have a flight school, so people with different representations of the 5 lines of business that the port conducts. And then also, like I mentioned, we're trying to get more people of color, because right now everybody is white.
Just one more thought on that. What about the people that don't represent the flight school or the, you know, all the things you mentioned, and you, because the people, this is their county, yeah.
Sounds like.
I think that may be a great private conversation, but I think we're wrapping up at the same time.
Thank you.
Let's thank Carla and John. Thank you for coming to the Quarterly Speaker Series, and we'll have another one. Thank you.